It's no secret that Sherlock and Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes movies dominated the 2010s, each offering their own stylish, charismatic takes on the legendary detective, but there was another, more grounded, and deeply underrated version of Sherlock Holmes quietly solving crimes at the same time. For many fans, Benedict Cumberbatch's brilliant but emotionally distant sleuth in Sherlock became the definitive modern interpretation. Others still prefer Robert Downey Jr.'s eccentric, action-driven take from Guy Ritchie's explosive 2009 film Sherlock Holmes and its sequel, A Game of Shadows. Both portrayals reimagined Holmes in captivating, if radically different, ways, helping to reignite mainstream interest in the character. However, Cumberbatch and Downey Jr. weren't the only ones to step into Holmes' iconic shoes in the 2010s. While the BBC's Sherlock was a global sensation and the RDJ-led films were box office hits, another version of the character was quietly building a fanbase across 7 seasons. Anchored by a performance that blended intellect, vulnerability, and evolution, this overlooked take gave fans a radically different, and arguably more human, Sherlock Holmes. There's no doubt that the decade gave us several incredible adaptations of the detective, but when it comes to the most underrated version of Sherlock Holmes, Elementary deserves far more credit than it usually gets. Johnny Lee Miller is the most underrated Sherlock Holmes of the 2010s. Johnny Lee Miller gave Sherlock Holmes his most emotionally complex TV portrayal yet. From 2012 to 2019, Elementary reimagined Arthur Conan Doyle's detective as a recovering drug addict working with the NYPD, and actor Johnny Lee Miller brought a raw, emotionally nuanced performance playing Sherlock Holmes across all 7 seasons. The CBS show stood out by combining the structure of a weekly Mystery of the Week format with deeply serialized character development. Miller's Sherlock was every bit the brilliant, detail-obsessed sleuth fans expected, but his version also wrestled with guilt, trauma, and addiction in ways no other version had explored so deeply. Elementary begins with Sherlock Holmes, Johnny Lee Miller, relocating from London to New York City after a stint in rehab. He's assigned a sober companion, Joan Watson, Lucy Liu, who eventually becomes his investigative partner. That small shift, making Watson a woman, immediately set Elementary apart from both Sherlock and the Guy Ritchie films, but the show did much more than gender-swap a character. It used the Holmes-Watson dynamic to explore themes of trust, codependency, and healing, all while staying true to the spirit of Arthur Conan Doyle's original stories. What made Miller's portrayal of this underrated version of Sherlock Holmes so compelling was its consistent emotional evolution. Unlike Benedict Cumberbatch's Holmes, who often remained emotionally detached, Miller's detective was in a constant state of growth. Over 7 seasons, viewers saw Sherlock develop meaningful relationships, confront his past, and gradually allow himself to feel empathy and remorse. Elementary didn't treat his emotional breakthroughs as anomalies, they were part of his journey toward becoming a better person and a better detective. Johnny Lee Miller's performance struck a rare balance. It honored the classic quirks of Sherlock Holmes, his obsession with logic, his disregard for social niceties, while rooting the character in a more grounded, human world. It was an interpretation that may have flown under the radar for many fans of the detective, but it's one of the most rewarding and emotionally rich takes to date. Elementary was a sleeper hit that got Sherlock Holmes right. Elementary quietly delivered one of the most faithful modern Sherlock Holmes adaptations. Natalie Dormer as Moriarty and Johnny Lee Miller as Sherlock Holmes looking at each other during an intense conversation on the street in Elementary. While Sherlock dazzled audiences with its slick visuals and puzzle box plots, Elementary focused more on character development and the slow, methodical unraveling of mysteries. It didn't have the same pop culture cachet as the BBC series or the Guy Ritchie films, but that doesn't mean it didn't get Sherlock Holmes right. In fact, Elementary may have captured the essence of Doyle's detective more accurately than its higher-profile counterparts. Elementary didn't rely on bombastic action or flashy twists. Instead, it embraced a more grounded approach, rooted in the quiet intelligence and tireless persistence that defined Sherlock Holmes at his core. Each episode offered self-contained mysteries that paid homage to the detective's literary roots, while also slowly building an overarching narrative that deepened over time, from recurring adversaries like Moriarty, played with chilling brilliance by Natalie Dormer, to thoughtful reinterpretations of canon elements. Elementary consistently honored its source material. More importantly, it depicted an underrated version of Sherlock Holmes who didn't just solve crimes, he grew as a person. Johnny Lee Miller's Holmes wasn't just the smartest guy in the room, he was someone trying to rebuild his life. His drug addiction wasn't a quirky footnote, either. It was central to his identity, and the show treated it with respect and realism. The relationship between Sherlock and Joan Watson became the emotional backbone of the series, transforming from reluctant partnership into a bond that rivaled any Holmes-Watson pairing on screen. The show never tried to be flashy. It succeeded by being consistent, intelligent, and quietly profound. Over time, Elementary built a loyal following of viewers who appreciated its slow-burn storytelling and character-driven drama. It may never have reached the pop culture saturation of Sherlock, but Elementary carved out its own place in the Holmes canon, one that deserves far more recognition, especially for its underrated version of Sherlock Holmes. How Johnny Lee Miller's Sherlock was different from Cumberbatch and Downey Jr. Each Sherlock brought something unique, but Johnny Lee Miller's version stood alone. Robert Downey Jr. and Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes. Custom image by Sophie Evans. Every modern version of Sherlock Holmes seems to bring something unique to the character, and Johnny Lee Miller in Elementary is no exception. Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes was emotionally stunted, brilliant to a fault, and addicted to the thrill of solving puzzles. Robert Downey Jr.'s take leaned heavily into the eccentricity and action hero flair of Holmes, complete with slow-motion deductions and bare-knuckle brawls. Johnny Lee Miller's portrayal, meanwhile, was more introspective, grounded, and, crucially, evolving. That evolution is what sets Elementary apart from other adaptations and makes it a standout in the conversation about the most underrated version of Sherlock Holmes. Where Sherlock often framed its protagonist as an untouchable genius, Elementary explored Sherlock's vulnerability.